Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle journey through history. Tonight, we'll drift back to the Victorian era, where the gaslights flicker, the rain whispers on London's rooftops, and everyday life unfolds beneath Queen Victoria's quiet gaze. Find a comfortable place, let the world outside fade, and allow this slow, soothing story to carry you toward peaceful rest. If you enjoy these calm, sleepy journeys through the past, a like and a quick subscribe would mean so much. It helps keep these relaxing stories coming your way. In the soft gray of dawn, London stirred beneath a blanket of fog. The cobblestone streets glistened faintly from a night of misty drizzle, and distant church bells marked the hour with a gentle chime. Bakers rose before the sun, their warm ovens casting golden light through tiny shop windows. The aroma of fresh bread drifted into quiet alleyways where only a few early risers and delivery boys hurried about their tasks. A single horse-drawn carriage clattered softly in the distance, its wheels echoing between tall, soot-streaked buildings. The city felt as if it was holding its breath, calm, patient, and waiting for life to spill into its veins. As the light grew, shopkeepers opened their shutters with a creak and a sigh. The world above was still sleepy, curtains drawn tight in narrow windows, while below, small sparks of energy began to appear. Chimneys released their first wisps of smoke, forming delicate curls that vanished into the damp air. The city smelled faintly of coal and bread, a mixture both comforting and heavy. This was London at its quietest, not yet the roaring engine of empire, but a gentle heartbeat beneath the clouds. Workers trudged to factories with lunch pails swinging, their boots leaving muddy imprints on the stones. A milkman's cart rolled by, its metal cans clinking softly like a lullaby. Somewhere, a newsboy yawned, clutching papers under his arm, waiting for headlines to sell. The mighty Victorian world, with all its grandeur and turmoil, began each day not with fanfare, but with these small, humble rituals. In the grander parts of the city, polished carriages waited at the edges of crescents lined with elegant townhouses. Behind their windows, wealthy families enjoyed breakfasts of eggs, sausages, and steaming tea served on silver trays. Yet even in these refined spaces, the day's rhythm was set by quieter, unseen hands, the cooks, the maids, the coachmen who made their masters' mornings smooth and serene. The fog thickened as the city woke. Shop signs appeared as blurred shapes through the haze, and the Thames whispered along its banks, carrying the first barges toward the docks. The city's pulse quickened ever so slightly. A cough here, a hammer strike there, and the faint sound of wheels on stone. Beneath the surface, London was already alive. By mid-morning, the streets bustled with a restrained energy. Flower sellers arranged their blooms at corners, their soft voices offering color against the gray. Children in simple coats clutched their parents' hands, peeking at pastries in bakery windows. The day had begun, and the Victorian city, with all its contrasts, opened its eyes to the world once more. Below the polished floors of the wealthy homes, life followed a different rhythm. Servants woke long before their masters, dressing quietly by candlelight in chilly attic rooms. The first tasks of the day began in darkness, stoking fires, polishing shoes, and preparing kettles of water for the household above. These early hours were theirs alone, marked by the quiet scrape of coal shovels and the whisper of broom bristles on stone. The servants' world was a place of narrow staircases and low ceilings, hidden passages that allowed them to appear and disappear without disturbing the family. In the kitchens, the air was warm with the scent of bread baking and bacon sizzling on iron pans. Copper pots gleamed faintly in the dim light, polished until they shone like small suns. The clatter of dishes was a muted song of labor, a melody that existed only below the surface of grandeur. Breakfast for the masters was a ritual of perfection. Toast cut evenly, tea poured just right, and tableware arranged with care. Yet those who prepared it ate their own meals standing, quickly and without ceremony. The hierarchy was strict and unquestioned. Butlers oversaw footmen, housekeepers directed maids, and even among servants, status mattered deeply. A single mistake, a chipped cup, a delayed tray, could mean scolding or dismissal. Above them, the wealthy families lived in rooms filled with velvet drapes, chandeliers, and ornate mirrors. But it was the unseen hands below that ensured the illusion of effortless elegance. Every polished floor and spotless window told the story of unseen effort, of lives lived in service and shadows. The city's grandeur rested on their quiet discipline. Despite the long hours and rigid rules, moments of kindness existed. A shared smile over tea scraps, a whispered joke in the hallway, or the comfort of familiar faces in the scullery reminded them that they too belonged to a small community. Though invisible to their employers, they were the heartbeat of the Victorian household, keeping its world turning silently. As the day unfolded, servants would retreat once more to the background, their presence erased as soon as their work was done. The grandeur of London's elite depended on their labor, yet history rarely remembers their names. In the quiet of the servants' quarters, with rain tapping gently against the window panes, they carried on, unnoticed yet indispensable. In the shadowed alleys of Victorian London, childhood was a quiet and often unseen struggle. Many children awoke not to lessons or play, but to the call of labor. Small hands scrubbed floors, polished boots, or gathered coal, their tiny bodies bent under loads far too heavy. The sound of laughter was rare in these early hours, replaced by the soft scuff of boots on cobblestone and the creak of factory doors. Childhood dreams were often whispered quietly in the dark. Hidden behind tired eyes and calloused palms, schools, for those who attended, were strict and unforgiving. Long wooden benches, chalk dust in the air, and the constant reminder of discipline shaped young minds. The rules were many, the punishments swift. A child could be scolded for a smudged paper or a wandering gaze. Yet, amid the stern teachers and rigid lessons, there was a flicker of curiosity, a longing for knowledge that no amount of sternness could fully suppress. For others, the streets themselves became their classroom. Street vendors, chimney sweeps, and orphan boys navigated a city that offered little safety. They learned the unwritten rules of survival, where to find scraps of bread, which alleys to avoid, and how to dodge the watchful eyes of the constables. London streets, though cold and dangerous, became both playground and prison. Even in wealthy homes, childhood was marked by restraint. Daughters were dressed in fine lace, but taught early that their futures were bound by duty and expectation. Sons were prepared for careers in law, clergy, or the military, their days filled with tutors and carefully chosen books. Toys and games existed, but they were always wrapped in a sense of decorum. Playtime was never entirely free. The dreams of Victorian children were fragile but enduring. A little girl might imagine herself walking beneath bright skies, far from the coal smoke that darkened her world. A boy sweeping chimneys might dream of sailing ships and distant horizons. These private hopes were their quiet rebellion against a world that often gave them little choice. As evening fell, the city's children retreated to cramped rooms or dark alleys, their voices fading into the hum of the city. Though history rarely records their names, the silent world of Victorian childhood was one of resilience and hidden wonder, a world where even the smallest spark of hope could survive beneath the weight of a great empire. In the Victorian era, a simple cup of tea could reveal the boundaries of class and status. Afternoon tea, with its delicate cups and polished silver, was more than refreshment. It was a ritual that spoke volumes about wealth, refinement, and belonging. In grand drawing rooms filled with patterned wallpaper and flickering gaslight, ladies and gentlemen gathered to sip carefully brewed tea, their voices low and measured. The ritual began with precision. The tea leaves, often imported from India or Ceylon, were steeped just so, and the pouring was a graceful act in itself. Sugar and milk were added with care, and the order of these steps was quietly observed. Sandwiches, scones, and small cakes appeared on tiered trays, their neat arrangement a reflection of the host's elegance. Even the angle of a spoon, or the way a napkin was folded, held unspoken meaning. For the working class, tea was simpler yet equally essential. It was a comfort after long hours in factories or workshops, a small luxury that made the hardships of the day easier to bear. A chipped mug, a splash of milk, and a shared loaf of bread could transform a bare table into a moment of warmth. Tea was the common thread that bound all levels of society. It was both a luxury and a necessity. The act of taking tea was also a subtle performance of social rules. A misplaced gesture or an unpolished manner could betray one's origins. To be invited to tea in a fine home was to be tested. Could you hold the cup properly, make polite conversation, and understand the delicate dance of etiquette? To fail was to be silently judged. In poorer districts, families gathered around wooden tables scarred by years of use. The tea might be weak, the bread coarse, but the sense of togetherness was strong. Conversations were simple, laughter louder, and the ritual carried no pretense. In those modest moments, tea was not about class, it was about connection and survival. As dusk settled over London, drawing rooms grew quieter. The last cups of tea were poured, and silver spoons clinked softly against porcelain. The ritual had done its work, reinforcing the invisible boundaries between rich and poor, but also reminding everyone, whether in a mansion or a humble flat, that even in a divided society, some comforts were shared. Victorian women lived within boundaries that were as elegant as they were confining. In parlors lined with velvet drapes, they were expected to embody grace, modesty, and obedience. A lady's reputation was as fragile as porcelain. One misstep in behavior could tarnish her family's honor. Marriage was often seen not as a matter of love, but as the transaction of status, land, or financial security. Beneath the lace and pearls, many women longed for freedom they could rarely express aloud. Clothing itself became a symbol of these restrictions. Corsets cinched waists until breathing was shallow, while layers of skirts and petticoats made even simple movement a calculated effort. Fashion, beautiful though it seemed, was a reminder that a woman's role was ornamental, admired from a distance, but limited in action. Social gatherings, teas, and formal balls all reinforced this delicate prison of silk and etiquette. Behind closed doors, some women found quiet ways to rebel. They read novels that challenged convention, wrote letters to friends about secret dreams, or supported social reforms under the guise of charity work. A few courageous voices began to question why opportunity and education belonged mostly to men. Their whispers would one day become movements, but in the Victorian age, change was slow and careful. Working-class women faced different but equally heavy burdens. Many toiled in factories or as laundresses, their hands cracked from soap and cold water. Others served as housemaids or cooks in wealthy homes, their own ambitions tucked away behind endless chores. For them, life offered little room for dreams, only the hope of survival, and perhaps a small measure of security. Despite the restrictions, moments of joy existed. A shared smile at a kitchen table, a stolen afternoon walk through a park, or the simple pleasure of a cup of tea by a fire could bring warmth to even the hardest days. Victorian women, whether wealthy or poor, carried within them quiet strength and unspoken resilience. As evening lamps flickered to life across London, the city's women continued their delicate balancing act. Some stood proudly in drawing rooms, while others collapsed in exhaustion after long shifts. The age called them angels of the house, but beneath the title was a truth seldom acknowledged. They were the unseen pillars, holding up a world that rarely gave them credit. The Victorian era was a time of relentless transformation, driven by the revolution of steam and steel. Factories sprouted like dark fortresses across the landscape, their chimneys belching smoke that turned skies gray. The hum of machines and the pounding of hammers filled the air, a constant reminder of progress. Trains thundered through the countryside, their whistles echoing across fields, stitching distant towns together with iron rails. In cities like Manchester and Birmingham, factory floors buzzed with activity. Men, women, and even children worked long hours in dangerous conditions, their lives tied to the rhythm of the machines. Wages were meager, accidents were common, and yet the promise of steady work drew thousands from rural villages. The old ways of farming and handcraft were disappearing, replaced by the roar of industry. London itself was transformed. Streets once lit by flickering gas lamps now bustled with horse-drawn omnibuses and crowded marketplaces overflowing with goods. Department stores rose like cathedrals of commerce, dazzling visitors with mirrors, lights, and endless rows of fabric and finery. The city was growing richer, louder, and more chaotic by the day. But progress carried a heavy price. The air was thick with coal smoke, and the Thames grew foul with waste. Disease spread quickly through cramped tenements where poor families lived crowded in single rooms. Even as wealth and innovation flourished for some, many others lived on the edge of survival. The contrast between glittering ballrooms and squalid slums was stark and unavoidable. Yet there was awe in this new world. Steam engines shrieked like living creatures, bridges of iron spanned mighty rivers, and inventions like the telegraph shrank distances once thought unbridgeable. For all its hardships, the Victorian age believed in the power of progress, believed that the world could be remade, even if it cost sweat, tears, and sometimes lives. As night fell over factory towns, the machines quieted for a few precious hours. Workers trudged home, weary but hopeful, their faces smudged with soot. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of a train faded into the dark, a reminder that the world was moving forward, faster and louder than ever before. In Queen Victoria's time, medicine was still taking its first uncertain steps toward modern understanding. Hospitals were intimidating places, cold walls, dimly lit corridors, and the sharp scent of primitive disinfectants. Surgeons often operated without gloves or anesthesia, their metal tools glinting under flickering lamps, while patients gritted their teeth or fainted from the agony. Yet amidst this harsh reality, there was a deep belief that science could work miracles, even if the path forward was paved with painful experiments. Amputations were common, often performed to stop infections or treat accidents in the bustling factories. Surgeons prized speed over precision, racing to complete a procedure before the patient slipped into shock. In poorer neighborhoods, wandering physicians offered treatments for a few pennies, herbal tonics, home-brewed elixirs, or remedies of questionable effectiveness. Despite the risks, every small breakthrough felt like a candle lit in the darkness. Vaccination began to spread slowly, fighting deadly diseases like smallpox. Many feared or doubted the new practice, but stories of survival traveled from home to home, planting seeds of trust. In most households, women acted as caretakers, cleaning wounds and reusing cloth bandages over and over. Sometimes their gentle, familiar hands brought more comfort than the crowded, impersonal wards of a city hospital. By the mid-Victorian era, ether and chloroform emerged as anesthetics, transforming surgery forever. Those who had witnessed earlier operations could hardly believe their eyes. Patients lay peacefully asleep as surgeons worked. To many, it felt like magic, a door opening onto a safer, kinder future. Yet errors and tragedies still occurred, a reminder that progress was not without its cost. Victorian doctors were also explorers and experimenters. The discovery of germs and their link to disease revolutionized hygiene and sanitation. Streets saw improved sewage systems, and personal cleanliness began to gain importance. Even so, old medical superstitions lingered, and traditional folk remedies were passed down alongside the latest scientific advances. In the heart of London, medical schools filled with eager students, their eyes bright with curiosity. They studied anatomy on anonymous cadavers, sometimes procured through questionable means, knowing each lesson brought them closer to saving lives. For these young physicians, every successful operation and every effective vaccine was a victory against centuries of fear. Victorian medicine, for all its pain, was ultimately a story of hope slowly rising from suffering. In a society ruled by strict codes and rigid appearances, Victorian love letters were far more than ink on paper. They were daring acts of defiance, secret adventures taken by two hearts, especially when the lovers belonged to different social classes. Each letter was written with exquisite care, often adorned with pressed flowers or scented with perfume. a fragile vessel for forbidden emotions. Sending a love letter in foggy London required courage. Servants or trusted friends acted as discreet couriers, slipping envelopes between hands and through doorways, always wary of prying eyes. Discovery could spark a scandal that ruined reputations and tore apart carefully constructed lives. Among the wealthy, love was tightly bound to questions of status and lineage. A young man risking contact with a lady of higher rank gambled his future, while young women concealed their feelings behind polite prose or poetry. To hide their intent, some lovers used secret codes, tiny symbols in book margins, or phrases whose meaning only they understood. Not every letter carried joy. Some bore heartbreaking farewells or grim news from distant battlefields. Yet even the saddest words preserved whole worlds within their folds, dreams, promises, and tears that could not be shed in public. The blotches of ink and the faint traces of moisture on paper told stories that formal society would never approve. These letters reflected an age that valued propriety, yet brimmed with unspoken passion. Every sentence was carefully weighed, every phrase a step along the narrow line between hope and despair. Even small imperfections, a smudge of ink, a shaky hand, could become proof of genuine feeling. Victorian love letters remind us that human longing cannot be silenced by rules or appearances. Beneath the fog and rain, amid the clatter of carriage wheels on cobblestones, whispered confessions traveled quietly across London. They formed an invisible history, one of yearning hearts that the official records of kings and governments could never capture. When evening settled over Victorian London, the gaslights flickered to life, casting long, eerie shadows across cobblestone streets. The city's respectable veneer faded with the daylight, revealing a darker world beneath the surface. In narrow alleys and hidden courtyards, whispers of crime and secret dealings passed through the damp air. The same streets that hosted bustling markets by day became dangerous after dusk, with footpads and pickpockets lurking in the gloom. Prostitutes walked the foggy lanes, their figures blurred in the mist, offering fleeting warmth to lonely hearts and desperate souls. Brothels operated quietly behind unmarked doors, while gambling dens hummed with risk and whispered bets. Respectable men sometimes slipped into these places in disguise, seeking forbidden pleasures while maintaining their public image. The contrast between polished drawing rooms and these hidden corners was stark. A reminder of the city's complicated moral landscape. Police patrols, still a relatively new institution, worked tirelessly to maintain order. Their rounded helmets and rattling truncheons became familiar sights, but crime was clever and often one step ahead. Newspaper stories about robberies, murders, and mysterious disappearances captivated the public, blending fear with fascination. The legend of Jack the Ripper would later haunt these same streets, but even before his shadow, London's nightlife was already a stage for intrigue. For the poor, night brought additional hardship. Without proper lighting, slums became treacherous. Drunken brawls erupted outside taverns, and homeless children curled up under archways for warmth. Charitable missions sometimes offered bread or a blanket, but for many, survival depended on luck and quick wits. The city's heartbeat at night was both thrilling and terrifying. Amid the darkness, there were also moments of unexpected beauty. Music drifted from public houses. Laughter spilled from gatherings of workers unwinding after a long day. And distant carriage wheels echoed through the misty air. The Victorian night was not only a place of danger, but also of small joys and human connection, hidden like lanterns in the fog. As dawn approached, the city began to stir again. Bakers lit their ovens, milkmen began their rounds, and the darker memories of the night receded. The contrast between night and morning in Victorian London reflected the dual nature of society, outwardly proper, yet full of untold stories that existed just beyond the edge of respectability. At the heart of the Victorian world stood Queen Victoria herself, a small woman in stature, but immense in influence. Crowned at just 18, she became a symbol of stability in a rapidly changing time. Her reign stretched for over 60 years, during which Britain transformed through industry, empire, and social reform. Yet beneath the crown was a person who felt deeply, grieved openly, and loved fiercely. Victoria's marriage to Prince Albert was a partnership of devotion and shared purpose. Together, they raised a large family and sought to modernize the monarchy, making it more connected to ordinary people. When Albert died, Victoria's grief was so profound that she wore black for the rest of her life. Her mourning shaped public perception of the monarchy and deepened the sense of solemn dignity that defined her era. The Queen was not merely a figurehead. Through letters, counsel, and quiet persuasion, she influenced political decisions and cultural trends. She supported advancements in science and industry, admired great thinkers and writers, and believed strongly in moral responsibility. For many of her subjects, she was both a distant sovereign and a familiar grandmotherly figure whose presence anchored their world. Under her watch, the British Empire expanded dramatically. Yet Victoria also witnessed poverty and suffering within her own cities. Social reformers often appealed to her compassion, urging her to see beyond the grandeur of palaces and ceremonies. While the empire projected power abroad, at home, she embodied the idea that leadership could also mean empathy and constancy. Her name came to define an entire age, Victorian, a word now synonymous with strict manners, industriousness, and a complex mix of progress and restraint. But her humanity sometimes broke through the formal image. She adored animals, enjoyed simple walks, and expressed tender affection for her grandchildren. These glimpses made her feel less like a distant ruler and more like part of the families who spoke her name at dinner tables across the nation. When Queen Victoria passed away in 1901, the world felt a shift. Bells tolled, crowds gathered in silence, and the era she had shaped so profoundly came to an end. Yet her legacy endured in architecture, culture, and even the quiet rituals of daily life she had influenced. To this day, the Victorian era remains a bridge between tradition and modernity, a time when a queen's quiet strength guided a nation through sweeping change. As the fog lifts and the gaslights fade in our imagination, we leave behind the cobbled streets and the echo of carriage wheels. The Victorian era was a tapestry of contrasts, opulence and hardship, progress and tradition, light and shadow. In its bustling markets, smoky factories, and quiet parlors, the heartbeat of a complex world still lingers. Through the lives of servants, workers, mothers, and even the Queen herself, we've wandered through a time when every small detail, tea poured into fine china, a whispered confession in a letter, or the clang of industry, told the story of a nation transforming itself. It was not a world of simple heroes and villains, but of ordinary people trying to find meaning and comfort beneath the weight of history. As you drift toward sleep, imagine the soft patter of rain on Victorian rooftops and the distant hum of the city settling into night. Let the memories of that age fade gently, like the last embers of a hearth fire, leaving only a sense of calm and connection to the long thread of human stories that continues even now.